Have you ever felt that quiet before a storm? Not the kind with thunder and lightning, but the silence that settles just before your world falls apart. It's a tricky, deceptive quiet. The kind that makes you think everything is okay. That silence filled my home the day my son, with a bright, eager smile, said, "Dad, we're moving in tomorrow." I smiled back, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind you wear when you're holding back a hurricane behind your eyes. Because I already knew. I knew what he and his wife had been planning. You see, the deepest betrayals don't come from your enemies. They come from the very voices that once called you Dad. For 35 years, this house has been more than just a building. It's been my life's work, my sanctuary. After my wife passed away, I poured my grief and my love into these walls. I built it with my own hands, beam by beam, memory by memory. This is where I raised my son. I saw him take his first steps. Right on this floor, I watched him grow up, and I tried to teach him that integrity and honesty are more precious than any amount of money. But somewhere along the way, he learned a different lesson, a colder one. He learned that money can make you forget who you are and where you come from. It started subtly, a growing distance, a chill in his voice. Then he married a woman who saw family as a stepping stone and love as a transaction. She wasn't outwardly cruel, just calculating. She measured a person's worth by their bank account and affection by the price tag on a gift. I tried to bridge the gap, to keep the peace for my son's sake. I told myself that love could overcome this, that family would prevail. But you can't teach gratitude to someone who believes love is a currency. The illusion shattered one afternoon. I was out on the porch, mending a loose Rolinga's simple, quiet task. I thought I was alone. Then I heard a voice slice through the afternoon air. It was sharp, confident, and tinged with a mockery that made my blood run cold. "Once the house is in our name, we'll move in," she said. "He's old. He won't need it for much longer anyway." My heart stopped. It just stopped. Then, the blow that truly broke me. My son's voice, my boy's voice, replied, "Yeah, Dad will sign it over soon. He just needs a little push. A little." Push? All those years, I taught him how to stand tall, how to be a good man, and now he was planning to push me down. The next day, they arrived with boxes, that same false brightness in their eyes. They walked through the door, as if they already owned the place. My son put a pen and a document in front of me. "Just a formality, Dad," he said, his voice smooth, "to make things easier for the future. The title transfer. He wanted me to sign away my home, my past, my dignity." I looked at him, searching for the boy I raised, but all I saw was a stranger wearing his face, a stranger co-opted by greed. The silence in the room was deafening. It was the moment of truth. My hand trembled, not from age, but from a profound, heart-wrenching sorrow. So I picked up the pen, but I didn't sign. Instead, I looked him dead in the eye and said, "No." The shock on their faces was almost comical. They had been so sure. "What do you mean?" "No," his wife snapped, her mask of sweetness finally slipping. "I mean, this house is not for sale," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "and it's certainly not a gift for those who would discard the giver." My son started to argue, to persuade, to guilt me. He talked about family, about looking after me. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I just held up my hand. "I heard you," I said quietly. On the porch, I heard everything. The color drained from his face. There was no more argument, no more pretense. Who's to ugly naked truth hanging between us. Had chosen. And he hadn't chosen me. He hadn't chosen family or honor. He had chosen a life measured in square feet and dollar signs. They left. The house was quiet again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the calm before the storm. It was the quiet after. The quiet of loss, but also the quiet of survival. In the days that followed, I did a lot of thinking. I thought about the man I had raised and the man he had become. It's a painful thing to realize you can give someone everything you have, and it still won't be enough to teach them what truly matters. But I also realized something else. This house wasn't just my past. It was my future. It was my independence. My wife's memory lived here. My strength was in these walls. Giving it up would have been like giving up on myself. So, I made a new plan. I went to a lawyer and set up a trust. The house would be protected, preserved, not for a son who had forgotten its value, but for a purpose that honored it. I decided to turn this place, my home, into a haven. A place for people who needed a second chance. A community space where stories could be shared and kindness could grow. The pain of my son's betrayal will likely never fade completely. It's a scar I'll carry, but I refuse to let it define my final chapter. I built this house with love, and I will not let it be taken by greed. Instead, it will be filled with love, once more a different kind of love. A wider love. A legacy not of blood, but of spirit. Sometimes, the greatest acts of love aren't about holding on, but about letting go of what's hurting you and building something new and beautiful from the wreckage. My story isn't over. In fact, a new chapter has just begun. That night, I sat alone in my study, staring at the family photos lining the shelves. There was my boy's first birthday, his graduation, the day he married that woman. Every picture told the story of a man who gave everything he had to his family. And for the first time in my entire life, I felt something I never thought I'd feel for my own child. Distrust. He called the next day, his voice sickeningly cheerful and fake, asking how I was doing. I played along. I told him I was thinking about the future, about simplifying things. I could almost hear the greed dripping from his voice as he said, "That's great. Dad, we'll help you with everything." It's funny how greed makes people forget who built the very floor they were standing on. And that's when I decided, if they thought I was old, naive, and ready to hand over my life's work, they were about to learn exactly what kind of man raised this family. I wasn't always a man of silence. I used to be the kind who laughed loudly, who believed in second chances, who thought family was stronger than pride. But that belief shattered the day I realized my own son saw me not as a father, but as a stepping stone. They say the first betrayal never comes from strangers. It comes from the ones who know exactly where your heart lives. It all started a few months before that final, fateful moment. He began visiting more often, calling, checking up on me, asking about my health. It was strange. My son hadn't asked about my blood pressure in years, but now, suddenly, he was deeply concerned. At first, I let myself believe maybe he'd changed. Maybe marriage had finally matured him. But then I started noticing the little slips. Like how his wife, Emily, would look around my house with assessing eyes, as if she was shopping for furniture. Or how my son would subtly bring up my finances, asking about my investments and retirement accounts under the guise of making sure I'm secure. One afternoon, Emily mentioned offhandedly, "This house has such good bones. A little updating, and it would be perfect." She said it with a sweet smile, but her eyes were already knocking down walls and picking out new paint colors. That was the moment the fog started to clear. They weren't concerned about my health, they were concerned about their inheritance. They saw me not as a person, but as an obstacle sitting on top of their future fortune. The final confirmation came when I accidentally overheard them talking in the garden. I was just watering my roses, hidden by the high hedge. "He's getting so forgetful," my son whispered. "We need to step in before he does something foolish with his money." Emily agreed, adding, "If we move in, we can manage everything for him. It's for his own good, really. For my own good." The words echoed in my head, cold and sharp. They were planning to take over my life, my home, my independence, and they were trying to convince themselves it was an act of kindness. My heart didn't just break, it hardened. The love I had for my son turned into a cold, hard resolve. I had spent my life building a legacy, a home filled with memories, and they saw it as nothing more than a prize to be claimed. I spent the next few weeks playing the part of the doty old man they believed me to be. I'd forget where I put my keys. I'd ask the same question twice in a conversation. I let them believe their plan was working perfectly. All the while, I was making my own plans. I met with my lawyer, a man I trusted for 30 years. I contacted a realtor, a discreet professional who understood the situation without me having to spell it all out. I worked silently, meticulously, dismantling the future they had so arrogantly planned for themselves. Each signature on a document felt like taking back a piece of myself they had tried to steal. So when my son walked in a few days later, smiling that triumphant smile, holding a stack of empty cardboard boxers, and declaring, "We're moving in tomorrow, Dad. To help you out." Primera smiled baik takam, steady. I let him bask in his victory for a moment, before I handed him a plain white envelope. The confusion on his face was a picture. It tore it open expecting, I suppose, a signed deed or some legal document, handing him control. Instead, inside was the $2.8 million sale contract for the house. His smile froze, cracking like thin ice. Emily's vanished completely. Her face went pale, the mask of concern slipping away, to reveal the raw, ugly greed beneath. The silence that followed was worth more than every dollar from that sale. It was the sound of their entitlement crashing down around them, the sound of their deception being exposed in the harsh light of truth. Because that day, they didn't just lose a house. They lost the home they'd tried to take by deception. They lost the father they had so gravely underestimated. "I sold it," I said, my voice even. "I'm simplifying things, just like you suggested. I've bought a smaller place by the coast, much more manageable for an old man like me." I watched the realization dawn on them. They hadn't come to help me. They'd come to claim that prize, only to find the throne had already been sold from under them. My son finally found his voice, a choked whisper. "But this is our family home." "It was my home," I corrected him gently. "And a home is built on love and respect, not on deceit and greed." He looked at me then, truly looked at me, and for the first time, he saw not a frail old man, but the person who had held him, taught him, and provided for him his entire life. And he saw the stranger he had become. The shame in his eyes was profound, but it was too little, too late. The trust, once shattered, could never be perfectly pieced back together. And that was just the beginning. They thought the house was the grand prize, but they had no idea about the true extent of the legacy I had built. The sale of the house was just the first lesson. The rest of their education in humility and respect was about to begin. They had forgotten that I was the one who taught them how to play the game, and I had just changed all the rules. Thank you for listening to my story. It's a painful one, but it's a story about standing up for yourself, no matter who you're standing up to. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel for more stories. It means the world to me. Take care. My son, David, started bringing his fiancée, Emily, around more often. At first, I was happy. He'd found someone, but soon, I noticed something strange. Emily would walk through my house like she was shopping. She'd run her fingers along the marble counters, glance up at the chandeliers, and say things like, "You really don't need such a big place at your age, do you?" It felt off. When people start measuring your home, they're not admiring it, they're reclaiming Italiano. I tried to brush it off. After all, she was young, ambitious, and from a different world than mine. But one evening, while I was in the kitchen preparing dinner, I heard them whispering in the next room. Emily's voice was low but clear. "If we convince him to sign it over now," she said, "we can sell the place and buy something modern. You hate this old furniture anyway." And then I heard my son, my flesh and blood, reply, "He won't say no to me. He never does." Those words pierced deeper than any knife could. Because he was right. I'd never said no to him. From the day he was born, I gave him everything. When he was 8, I worked overtime for months just to buy him that shiny red bicycle he wanted for his birthday. When he was 16, Primera sold my old beloved truck, the one I'd had for years. I could afford his college deposit. And when he graduated, I gave him a job in my own construction firm, the same one I built from scratch after his mother passed away. You don't realize you've spoiled a heart until it starts rotting from the inside out. But that night, as I sat alone at my kitchen table, the half-made dinner growing cold, something inside me changed. I finally saw it. I had raised a man who no longer saw love on the Liberat. He visited again the next morning, cheerful as ever, a bright, fake smile plastered on his face. "Dad," he said, patting my shoulder. Emily and I were thinking, maybe you could put the house under my name, just in case anything happens. For security. I smiled back, pretending not to see the greed flickering in his eyes like a faulty light bulb. That's a big responsibility, I said calmly. You sure you're ready for that? He nodded quickly. Way too quickly. Greed always moves faster than guilt. I told him I'd think about it, but the moment his car pulled out of the driveway, I made my own call. I phoned a realtor I trusted, an old friend named George. I didn't waste time. George, I said, if I wanted to sell my property, quietly, no listings, no for sale signs, no gossip, how fast could we do it? He hesitated for a second, probably surprised. Then he said, if you're serious, I can have it done in 2 weeks. I took a deep breath. Make it 1. That night I pulled out the old blueprints, the ones I'd used to build this place decades ago. Every line, every beam, every wall held a memory. This wasn't just a house. It was a testament to my life's work, a monument to the love I had for my late wife. And now I was preparing to let it all go. Not because I wanted to, but because it was the only way to protect it, to protect its meaning from the wrong hands. Sometimes you have to burn your past to save what it stands for. The next few days were quiet but heavy. My son kept calling, dropping hints about the paperwork, about moving things along. He even brought Emily over one evening with a fancy bottle of wine. To celebrate early? She said with a dazzling smile. I sat there, a guest in my own home, listening to her talk about her new decor ideas, about how she'd turn my study, my sanctuary, into a minimalist home office. She smiled politely, but every word felt like a dagger dressed as charm. Some smiles are weapons. They just wait for the right moment to strike. I pretended to enjoy the evening. I played the role of the oblivious old man perfectly, but inside, I was miles away, mentally signing the papers that would destroy their little fantasy. Because I wasn't just selling the house, I was giving it away. I sold it to the local children's foundation. Every single penny from that $2.8 million sale would go to build homes for orphans and kids without families. Homes for children who would never dream of stealing from the people who loved them. They wanted property. I built purpose. The day of the closing, my son and Emily showed up unannounced, holding a folder. Dad, we brought the transfer documents, David said, his voice full of forced patience. I just looked at him and said, there's no need for that. The house is no longer mine. Confusion washed over their faces. What do you mean? Emily asked, her voice sharp. We sold it, I replied. Their jaws dropped. David's face turned pale, then red with anger. You sold it without telling me. To who? How could you? I looked him straight in the eye. I sold it to provide a home for children who have none. I learned a valuable lesson from you, son. A home isn't just walls and a roof. It's a place where you are loved, not where you are leveraged. They were speechless. The greed, the entitlement, the years of taking without giving it, all crashed down around them in that one silent moment. As they stood there, stunned into silence, I picked up my one small suitcase and walked out the door for the last time, leaving them behind in the empty shell of their own ambition. I didn't look back. My new life, one of true purpose, was just beginning. The sale moved faster than I could have imagined. Within days, the foundation had wired the full amount, and the legal transfer was officially complete. A heavy weight lifted from my shoulders, replaced by a quiet, steely resolve. I kept this monumental decision to myself. My son didn't know. Emily didn't know. Not even the paralegal who filed the paperwork. I wanted the reveal to be a surprise, poetic, final, and absolutely unforgettable. This wasn't just about selling a house. It was about teaching a lesson that had been a lifetime in the making. A few nights later, my phone rang. It was my son, his voice buzzing with an excitement that turned my stomach. Dad, we've decided, he announced, practically shouting. We're moving in tomorrow. We already gave our landlord notice and everything. Isn't that fantastic? A cold calm washed over me. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice to sound as normal as possible. That's wonderful, son. Just wonderful. Come by in the morning. I'll have something ready for you. When revenge is finally ready to be served, the calm voice can sound just like kindness. That night was a long one. Sleep was a distant stranger. I spent hours sitting by the window, watching the pale moonlight trace the familiar outline of the house ID. Poured my life into building. This was the very same house they had so brazenly tried to take from me. The home where my late wife and I had built our world. I thought of her unwavering belief in fairness, in standing your ground with quiet dignity rather than loud anger. I pulled out a photo, its edges softened by time, and whispered to her image, "Tomorrow, my love. Tomorrow will teach them what worth really means." Morning arrived slowly, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange, the air heavy with unspoken truths. My son pulled up early, a wide, triumphant grin plastered across his face. Emily was right behind him, phone already in hand, no doubt getting ready to document their grand move-in day for all her social media followers to see. They were so lost in their victory lap that they didn't even notice the discreet realtor-esque car parked across the street. They didn't see the small, folded sold tag I'd tucked away near the gate, a quiet harbinger of the storm to come. He dropped a box on the porch, turned to me with his arms wide open, and declared, "Dad, it's finally happening. We're home." I managed a small, tight smile. I reached for the envelope I'd left on the entryway table and handed it to him. "Congratulations," I said, my voice soft but firm. "This is your future. Revenge, I've learned, doesn't always need a furious rage. Sometimes all it needs is perfect timing." He eagerly tore open the envelope, his eyes scanning it, clearly expecting to see the deed to the house, with his name printed in bold. But, as I read, the triumphant color drained from his face, replaced by a sickly, pale shock. This is a sale agreement," he stammered, his hands starting to shake. "Dad, what is this? What have you done?" I met his confused, panicked gaze without flinching. "That, son," I said calmly, "is what happens when you try to move into something that was never yours to begin with." Emily's voice, usually so confident, cracked with disbelief. You sold it." I simply nodded. For $2.8 million, and every single cent is going to a children's home. I figured maybe those kids could learn a thing or two about what gratitude looks like, since my own son clearly didn't. You see, some of life's most important lessons are taught with words, but the ones that stick, the ones that truly change you, are taught with silence and signatures. The silence that fell over that room was suffocating. It was thick, heavy, and filled with the sound of a future shattering. My son just stood there, frozen, trembling not with anger, but with a deep, gut-wrenching shame. In that moment, he finally understood. The man he had so callously underestimated wasn't weak or defeated. He was just waiting for the right moment to make his move. As they turned and walked out, their faces pale and their hands completely empty, I realized something profound. Revenge doesn't always need to roar like a lion. Sometimes it just whispers. And when it does, its impact is louder than thunder. For a long time after they left, the house felt impossibly quiet. It wasn't the peaceful quiet I was used to, but the kind of silence that hums with the ghosts of everything you've just lost and everything you've just Revenge doesn't just end when your opponents walk out the door defeated. In many ways, that's when it truly begins, when the silence starts to echo with the consequences of your actions. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down in the old armchair in the living room. This was the same chair where I'd once sat dreaming of my son's futurist college, his career, his wedding. Looking around the now empty room, all those dreams felt like ashes floating in a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. But mixed with the undeniable ache in my chest, there was a strange and powerful sense of liberation. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of losing him anymore, because I finally accepted that I already had. And once you've lost what you thought mattered most, you begin to realize just how dangerous and freeing that kind of perspective can be. A man who has nothing left to lose is a man who can finally start winning on his own terms. The very next morning, my phone rang. It was George, the realtor. He was chuckling on the other end of the line. "You should have seen their faces," he said, still laughing. "The representatives from the charity came by to take some photos for the press release, and your son was there. Apparently, he tried to tell them there had been some kind of terrible mistake. I just smiled. The mistake, I thought, was made a long time ago. Thanks for joining me on this journey. It's a reminder that strength isn't always loud. I leaned back in my chair and managed a faint smile. Let them think whatever they want, George, I said quietly. The truth always catches up faster than the lies. And catch up, it did. Just 2 days later, the headline on the front page of the local paper was impossible to miss. Retired builder donates $2.8 million home to Children's Foundation. There it was, in bold print for the whole town to see. The article had my name, a mention of my late wife's memory, and even a photo of me, smiling, as I handed the keys over to the director of the charity. But the part that really made an impact, the line that stuck with people, was tucked away in the middle of the article. It read, "The donation was inspired by a personal lesson in family and gratitude." You see, you don't have to name names for guilty hearts to recognize themselves. After that, the phone didn't stop ringing. It was constant. Old friends called, some brimming with pride, others just plain curious about the whole story. But the one call I truly didn't expect came from Emily's father. Now, he was a sharp man, a high-powered corporate attorney, the kind of person who had never quite approved of my blue-collar roots. "Mr. Miller," he began, his voice measured. "I heard about your donation. That's quite generous." A heavy, careful pause hung in the air between us. "Is everything all right with Daniel and Emily?" I let the silence stretch for a moment longer, letting the weight of his unasked questions settle. "They're figuring things out," I finally said, choosing my words with care. "Sometimes. You have to lose a home to learn what a roof is really for." Every word of revenge sounds so much softer when it's wrapped in a bit of wisdom. I could tell from his silence that he understood far more than I had actually said. Sure enough, 2 days later, I heard through the grapevine that he had completely pulled the financial support he'd been offering my son's new startup company. Apparently, he didn't want his daughter married to a man who depended on other people's property. And that, my friends, is when the real storm began. It was about a week later when Daniel showed up at my office. He looked like a wreck. His face was pale. His usually perfect hair was unkempt. This was not the proud, confident young man who had once stood before me and boldly declared he was taking over the family legacy. He slammed his hand down hard on my desk, the sound echoing in the quiet room. "How could you do this to me?" he demanded, his voice shaking with rage. I looked up calmly from the paperwork I'd been reviewing. "You mean," I replied, my tone even, "how could I stop you from stealing what you never earned? You see, revenge is never cruel when it's simply fair." He just shook his head, pacing back and forth like an animal trapped in a cage of his own making. "You humiliated me. Emily's family thinks I'm some kind of leech now. Everyone in town is talking about it." I folded my hands on the desk, my posture calm and steady. "Son," I said gently, "people only talk about things that sound true." He had no reply for that. All he could offer was a glare that flickered between pure anger and a sliver of regret. When he finally spoke again, his voice cracked with emotion. "I thought you'd understand. I thought you wanted me to have everything you couldn't." That was when I stood up, pushing my chair back slowly. I met his gaze, and for the first time, I think he saw the depth of my disappointment. "No, Daniel. Primera wanted you to asterisk, an asterisk. What I couldn't. There's a very big difference. Love gives freely. Entitlement just takes and takes. But revenge, when done right, teaches." He stormed out of my office, muttering curses under his breath. And for the first time in his life, I didn't chase after him. I didn't call out an apology. I didn't beg him to come back and talk it over. Because this time, I knew deep in my gut that if I softened again, if I gave in, I'd lose the very lesson I had worked so hard to teach him. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it was necessary. The days that followed turned into weeks. Life moved on. I kept myself busy, doing what I do best, building houses. But this time it was different. I wasn't building for family or for legacy. I was building for purpose, Every new wall that went up, every nail hammered into place, every roof that was completed felt like another act of healing for my own weary soul. The children's foundation kept me incredibly busy, too. They'd call me for advice on new construction projects, for design ideas, and for simple ways to make their shelters feel more like real homes for the kids who needed them most. It's funny, isn't it? When you start rebuilding for others, you find that the ruins of your own past stop hurting so much. The story doesn't end there, of course. A few months passed. The talk around town died down, as it always does. One afternoon, while I was on a build site for the foundation, a familiar car pulled up. It was Daniel. He looked different. Thinner, maybe, but his eyes were clearer. He wasn't wearing an expensive suit, just jeans and a work shirt. He didn't say much at first. He just grabbed a hammer from his trunk and walked over. "Figured you could use an extra hand," he said, not quite meeting my eye. We worked in silence for the rest of the day, side by side, hammering, measuring, building. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the site, he finally broke the silence. "Dad." I get it now. He looked at the structure we were building, a home for families who had nothing. A roof is for shelter. Home. A home is something you build with your own two hands, with people you love. He just nodded, a lump forming in my throat. I put a hand on his shoulder. There were no more words needed. The lesson had been learned. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rebuilding not just houses, but a family. And that's a foundation that no amount of money can buy. Then, one evening, I got a message from Emily. It was short and hesitant. "Mr. Miller, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. You were right about everything." She went on to say she'd left Daniel temporarily, that his obsession with money had driven her away. "He's lost his job," she wrote, "and we can't even pay rent right now. I tried to help, but he just keeps blaming you." I didn't reply, not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood that silence, too, can be an answer. The sweetest revenge isn't anger, it's indifference. A few days later, I heard from George again. "Daniel's trying to sell off your old tools and equipment," he said. "Claims they were part of his inheritance." I just chuckled. He never stops trying to cash out on things he didn't build, does he? George sighed. "You sure you don't want to press charges?" I shook my head. "No. Let the world teach him now. I already did my part. Time has a way of grinding arrogance into humility, and it did. Slowly, painfully, publicly. Within months, Daniel's startup collapsed. His investors pulled out after the donation story went viral, questioning his character. He lost not just money, but reputation, credibility, and that illusion of control he'd held so dear. Revenge doesn't always destroy someone instantly. Sometimes it takes its time, savoring every crumble. I heard from mutual friends that he started working odd jobs just to stay afloat. Emily moved back in with her parents. They weren't villains, not really, just people blinded by greed. But blindness has consequences, and life was now teaching them in ways my words never could. And then came the same day every story like this seems to circle back to, when I saw him again. I was volunteering at the foundation site, watching kids play in the new courtyard we'd built. A thin, worn-out man approached the gate. His clothes were covered in dust, his eyes hollow but familiar. "Dad," he whispered, "time humbles everyone." And in that moment, I realized maybe this was what I wanted all along. Not revenge for pain's sake, but correction for a soul that had lost its way. True revenge isn't about ending someone. It's about rebuilding what their greed destroyed. That night, as I locked up the site, I glanced back at the half-built homes. The sound of hammers echoed faintly under the orange sunset. Somewhere in that rhythm was forgiveness, not the soft kind that forgets, but the strong kind that remembers and still chooses to move forward. And though he didn't know it yet, the next few weeks would test whether Daniel was truly ready to rebuild or just pretending again. Because revenge may end, but redemption has its own price. The next morning, Daniel showed up right on time. For a second, I thought he might not. I half expected him to return to his old arrogance, to think that construction work was beneath him. But no, he was there, standing under the early sun, holding a thermos of coffee and looking like a man stripped of everything but determination. Pride doesn't die in one blow. It fades slowly, every time you choose humility over ego. I didn't say much. I just handed him a set of blueprints and pointed toward the frame of the new building we were raising. "This is the children's dorm," I said. "We're short on manpower today. You'll start with the foundation team." He just nodded, took the blueprints, and walked over to the foreman without another word. The other workers knew who he was. Son who'd he tried to sell the very land they were building on. They kept their distance, speaking to him only when necessary. Daniel didn't complain. A host worked, his head down, sweat dripping from his brow. One afternoon, during a lunch break, I saw him sitting alone, away from everyone else, eating a simple sandwich. George came and sat next to me. "He's quiet," George noted. "Too quiet." "He's learning," I replied. "Learning that respect is earned with sweat, not inherited with a name." The work was hard, grueling even. It tested his body. But more than that, it tested his spirit. There were moments I saw the old Daniel flicker a flash of frustration when a task was harder than he expected, a shadow of resentment when he was corrected by a younger worker. But, each time, he swallowed his pride and carried on. One evening, after a particularly long day, he approached me as I was packing up. His hands were raw and blistered. "The west wall footing. It's not level," he said, his voice hoarse. I checked the plans again. "We need to repair a section." I looked at him, surprised. He could have ignored it, left it for someone else to find. It would have saved him hours of extra work. "You're sure?" I asked. He nodded. "It has to be right. For the kids." That was the turning point. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about the work, about the purpose behind it. That night, he stayed late with a small crew, working under portable lights to fix his own mistake. He didn't ask for help, but slowly, one by one, a few of the other guys came back to lend a hand. They didn't say much, but the shared silence was filled with a newfound respect. As weeks turned into a month, the change in him was undeniable. He started talking with the other workers, sharing stories of Enlagin. He wasn't the boss's son anymore. He was just one of them. He learned to measure twice and cut once, to value the strength of a team over the ambition of one man. Emily started visiting the site on weekends. At first, she'd watch from a distance, hesitant. Then, she started bringing lunch for Daniel, and soon, for the whole crew. I saw them talking, not with the frantic energy of their past, but with a quiet understanding. They were rebuilding, too, brick by brick. The day we finished the main structure of the dorm, everyone was celebrating. There were handshakes, back pats, and a genuine sense of accomplishment. I saw Daniel standing off to the side, looking up at the building, a tired but proud smile on his face. I walked over and stood beside him. "Your grandfather would have been proud," I said quietly. "Not of the son who left, but of the man who came back." Tears welled up in his eyes, but he didn't try to hide them. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said, his voice cracking, "for everything." I put a hand on his shoulder. "The past is concrete, son. It's Septiembre. What matters is what you build on top of it." My revenge wasn't seeing him broken. It was seeing him whole again. It wasn't about his fall. It was about his rise from the ashes of his own making. He had lost a fortune, but in the dust and sweat of that construction site, he found something far more valuable. Himself. And that, I realized, was the only victory that ever truly mattered. Redemption isn't a gift. It's a blueprint you have to be willing to follow, no matter how hard the labor. He nodded. No complaints. No questions. Just quiet obedience. It was strange seeing him like that. No designer clothes, no shiny watch, no fake charm. Just my son. Raw and real. Finally standing in the dirt like the man I used to be. You see, when life strips away everything fake, the truth is all you have left to wear. As the hours dragged on, I watched him from a distance. He wasn't fast, but he was determined. His hands, once soft, blistered quickly, the skin splitting under the rough weight of the shovel. But he didn't stop. Not even once. I could see it in his eyes. The anger was gone, replaced by something quieter. Regret, maybe, or perhaps a dawning realization. During the lunch break, the other workers gathered under the shade, laughing and eating sandwiches from foil wrappers. But Daniel sat alone, just staring at his torn, calloused palms. I walked over and handed him a bottle of water. "How's the foundation?" I asked, keeping my voice even. He looked up at me, his eyes weary. "Solid," he said. "It's harder than I thought." I allowed myself a small smirk. Good foundations always are. It's amazing, isn't it, how a simple conversation can carry the entire weight of forgiveness. Over the next few weeks, I watched him transform. The man who once demanded the world now showed up early, stayed late, and even made a point to thank the cook who served us our humble lunch. He never once mentioned the past, never asked for money, and never brought up the house he had tried to take from me. One evening, after the site had emptied out, we sat together on the tailgate of my old truck, watching the sunset stretch across the half-built dormitory. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple. Daniel broke the silence. "Dad," he started, his voice soft. "I used to think success was about owning things, houses, cars, companies. But now I think it's about building something that will outlive you." I turned to look at him. This son who had been so lost to greed just a short time ago. "Took you long enough to learn," I said, letting a soft chuckle escape. He smiled faintly. I guess I had a stubborn teacher. That's the thing about life. When pride finally meets patience, that's where redemption truly begins. But even as we found this fragile piece, something inside me remained unsettled. Maybe it was the part of me that still vividly remembered how easily he had tried to betray me. Maybe I just wasn't ready to forgive completely. Because while I'd seen him work hard, I hadn't yet seen him sacrifice. And so, I decided the final test wasn't over. Not yet. After all, forgiveness without proof is just wishful thinking wearing a halo. A few weeks later, the foundation director approached us. They were planning a big fundraising gala and event filled with donors, investors, and the press. They wanted someone from our construction team to speak about what the project meant to them. The director looked at me first, but I immediately shook my head. "Let Daniel speak," I said, my voice firm. "Let him tell them what this work really means." Daniel looked shocked, his eyes wide. "Me? Dad? I can't." "Yes, you can," I interrupted, not unkindly. "You've been building this place with your own two hands. You have more to say than anyone. In the end, The final redemption always comes when your own words replace your excuses. The night of the gala arrived. I stood in the back of the grand hall as Daniel walked onto the stage. The lights were blindingly bright. Cameras flashed from every corner, and the music slowly faded into a tense silence. He looked nervous, clutching his speech notes like a lifeline. But then, he took a deep breath and began to speak. "My name is Daniel Miller," he began, his voice a bit shaky, but steadying with every word. "A few months ago, I thought I understood value. I thought it came from money and ownership. But then, I lost everything. My business, my marriage, my pride." The audience was completely silent, hanging on his every word. He continued, "And when I had nothing left, I came here, to this place my father built, not for himself, but for children who have no one else. And I learned that true worth isn't measured in square footage or dollar signs. It's measured in impact." I could feel a lump rising in my throat. Then he paused, turned slightly, and looked directly at me, standing in the shadows at the back of the room. "And I owe that lesson to the man I once disrespected, my father. Perma, my father. He taught me that when you take without gratitude, you lose more than just your wealth. You lose yourself. You know, they say the sweetest redemption is when your enemies start quoting your own truth." Applause erupted throughout the hall. People stood up, clapping, cheering. Cameras flashed relentlessly, but I barely heard any of it. I was too busy trying to hold back the tears. After the event, Daniel found me outside the hall. The night air was cool. I meant every word. "Dad," he said quietly. I looked at my son, no longer the boy who left, but the man who had returned. "I know you did," I replied, putting a hand on his shoulder. "And now you understand why I did what I did." This journey taught us both that sometimes you have to tear everything down to the foundation to build something stronger, something that will truly last. "We'll see you in the next one." He nodded, his eyes glistening with tears. "Yeah," he finally whispered, the word heavy with years of regret. "You didn't sell the house to punish me. You sold it to free me." You see, I've learned something profound about revenge. It's not about destruction, not about tearing someone down until they're nothing. True revenge is about delivering a truth so powerful, so undeniable, that the person who refused to hear it is finally forced to listen. It's about holding up a mirror until they see the reflection they've been avoiding. But my plan wasn't finished. Even in that moment of fragile understanding, I had one final surprise left. This wasn't for cruelty. It was for closure. For him, for me, for the memory of his mother. "Danielle," I said, my voice steady, "do you know what the foundation did with the $2.8 million from the sale of the house?" He just shook his head, a look of confusion on his face. I allowed myself a small, quiet smile. This was the final piece of the puzzle. They built this entire housing complex for children who have nowhere else to go, and they named the central hall after your mother. It's called the Grace Miller Center. His mouth fell open. He mouthed her name. A single, stunned word. "Mom." "Yes," I confirmed, letting the truth settle in the space between us, because she believed every single person deserves a second chance. Even you, Daniel, especially you. Some stories of revenge end in bitter tears and shattered lives. The good ones, the ones that truly matter, end in redemption. He didn't say anything for a long time. The silence was thick with unspoken emotions. Then, he moved forward and wrapped his arms around me, hugging me tight. It wasn't the triumphant hug of a son who'd gotten what he wanted. No, this was different. This was the hug of a man finally, painfully, understanding everything he had thrown away. It was heavy, trembling, and felt like the raw, aching weight of forgiveness. From that night on, something inside Daniel shifted permanently. He didn't just apologize with words. He started living his apology. He never stopped working at the foundation. He poured his heart and soul into it, eventually becoming a project manager, dedicating himself to expanding the shelters into other towns, helping other families, other children. Every single paycheck he earned went right back into the work. He even started mentoring the younger workers. The kids who came from backgrounds as rough as his had become. He taught them the value of sweat, of honesty, of building something with your own two hands instead of taking it. A person doesn't truly change when they say, "I'm sorry." They change when they start planting what they once destroyed. Every time I saw him laughing with those kids, helping them with their homework, or just listening to their stories, I thought of that awful morning when he'd arrogantly declared, "We're moving in tomorrow, Dad." How different those words felt now. Because now, he had finally moved in. Not into a mansion built on entitlement, not into a life of inherited wealth, but into the kind of manhood his mother would have been immensely proud of. He had moved into a home built with humility, compassion, and hard work. That is the only house truly worth living in. Months turned into seasons. The foundation grew, not just in bricks and mortar, but in spirit, in hope. Everywhere I looked, I saw the tangible proof of Daniel's new life. I heard the echoes of children's laughter in the dormitories, saw the clean uniforms stacked neatly in storage closets, and watched as meals were served by volunteers he himself had trained and inspired. It's a strange and humbling thing to witness. The very same hands that once reached out to take everything, to grasp and to hoard, were now the hands that gave endlessly, without ever expecting anything in return. I still spent my mornings in the side office, going over blueprints and donation reports, the nuts and bolts of the operation. But my afternoons became my sacred time. I would just sit and watch. I'd watch Daniel walk among the children, his tall frame no longer intimidating, but a source of comfort. I'd see him kneel to help a little girl with her math homework, his brow furrowed in concentration. I'd see him gently patch up a scraped knee on the playground or patiently fix a broken toy car, treating it with the same care as if it were a priceless antique. And every time I saw that, I realized something profound. The plan that had started in a place of cold, calculated anger, the revenge I had set in motion, was now healing more people than I could have ever imagined. It had blossomed into something beautiful and life-giving. It proved that sometimes, revenge, when it's crafted not for destruction, but for revelation, can become the very seed of redemption. One Friday evening, as a warm, golden sunset painted the hills behind the complex, Daniel came to my office. His hair was a little grayer, his face weathered by the sun, with fine lines around his eyes. But his eyes themselves, they held a deep, settled peace I hadn't seen in them since he was a boy. He walked over to my desk and placed a small, plain envelope on the worn wood. "Dad," he said softly, "this is for you." I frowned, looking from the envelope to his face. "What's this?" A genuine, easy smile touched his lips. "It's the repayment for what I owe you. Every dollar I've earned since I started at the foundation. I know it's not much," but I cut him off, shaking my head. I pushed the envelope back across the desk toward him. "Son," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "I didn't do any of this to get paid back. I did it because you needed to lose everything to finally find yourself." He lowered his head, his shoulders slumping for a moment. "And you were right," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "You were right. The best revenge isn't about watching someone suffer. It's about making them see. It's about guiding them to a truth they couldn't find on their own." We sat there in comfortable silence for a long time. The evening air was calm, and the gentle scent of rain on dry earth drifted through the open window. A smell of renewal and life. Then Daniel looked up, his gaze meeting mine directly. He said something that hit me with more force than any argument, any shouting match, any legal battle ever could. "Dad," he said, his voice clear and strong, "I'm proud of you." And in that single, quiet moment, I knew it was over. The revenge was complete. Because when the person who hurt you, who betrayed you so deeply, finally looks at you and sees your worth, sees the love behind your actions, that's when you've truly won. Real victory doesn't need applause or an audience. It just needs silence and a deep, abiding peace. A week later, a formal-looking letter arrived from the mayor's office. The foundation, our foundation, had been nominated for a prestigious humanitarian award for outstanding service to underprivileged children. They wanted both me and Daniel to attend the ceremony as its representatives. My son and I, standing together, being honored for the very thing that was born from our darkest moment. Life has a funny, beautiful way of coming full circle. When they first told me about the award, I almost said no. What's another plaque on the wall? It felt empty. But then my son, Daniel, stopped me. He pointed out the window, toward the lights of the dormitories we'd built. "Dad," he said, "this isn't for us. It's for them. For those kids." He was right. So we went. The event hall was buzzing. Hundreds of people, investors, volunteers, even government officials. Cameras were flashing. Music played softly. It was a world away from where our story began. When they called our names, Daniel and I walked onto that stage together. As I accepted the award, I looked out at the sea of faces, but my eyes found him. He was standing just a few steps behind me, a proud smile on his face, clapping louder than anyone in the room. And in that one single moment, I realized just how far we'd come. Revenge might burn bright, but forgiveness shines so much longer. After the ceremony, a young journalist pulled me aside. "Mr. Miller," she began, "your story has inspired thousands. People want to know, what was your motivation? What drove you to sell your house, your business, and walk away from your entire life?" I took a slow breath, and for a second, I was back in that moment. I could hear Daniel's arrogant tone, see that smug smile on his face as he told me, "We're moving in tomorrow, Dad." He thought he'd won. I looked back at the journalist. "My motivation," I said. "It was simple. I wanted to teach my son that a house built on greed will always collapse, but a home built on truth will stand forever. The real lesson of revenge isn't about destruction. It's about rebuilding the part of your soul that forgot how to stand on its own." The journalist smiled, thanked me, and moved on. But as Daniel and I were leaving the hall, he put his hand on my shoulder. He leaned in and said quietly, "You know, Dad, I think Mom would be proud." And just like that, the last little piece of anger I'd been holding on to for years finally melted away. When love takes the place of bitterness, even revenge can find its peace. The next morning, I woke up early. I drove back to the site, the place that had been born from all that pain. It was quiet, that beautiful calm before another day of work began. I stood at the gates of the Grace Miller Center, named for my late wife, and watched the plaque shine in the morning sun. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of betrayal. I just felt gratitude, because in the end, the $2.8 million I had used to destroy my son's dream had actually built something far, far greater. It had rebuilt us. You see, revenge is a tricky thing. Most people think it's about payback, about making someone else feel the pain they caused you. But real revenge, the kind that actually lasts, is never about their pain. It's about your clarity. You don't win when they suffer. You win when they finally understand. When Daniel told me, "We're moving in tomorrow," he thought he was claiming his victory. What he didn't realize was that I had already made my move. And it wasn't a move born from anger, but from purpose. He wanted walls and a roof. I wanted him to find growth and humility. It took him losing everything to finally rebuild the one thing money can never buy: his character. And I learned something profound in all this, too. Forgiveness doesn't mean you forget what happened. It just means you finally let go of the heavy burden that's keeping you from moving forward. Sometimes, the seed of forgiveness is planted in the soil of revenge, and it grows in the very spot where pride once lived. Today, Daniel runs the foundation full-time. He's become the man his mother always believed he could be. We still talk about that night, the night he tried to move into the house ID already sold from under him. But now, we laugh about it. We see it for what it was. It wasn't the end of our family. It was the beginning of a new one. And if you ask me if I regret selling that house, my answer will always be the same. Not for a single second. Because some houses are built with bricks and mortar, but others, the most important ones, like family, are rebuilt with lessons and with love. So, to anyone out there listening, to anyone who has ever felt the sting of betrayal from someone you love, remember this: don't rush to destroy. Instead, plan to teach. The sweetest revenge isn't about taking away what they have. It's about giving them what they truly need, a reason to change. And sometimes, the only way to save someone you love is to let them lose you first. That isn't cruelty. That's courage. The kind of courage that turns revenge into redemption. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, I'd be honored if you'd like and subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.